everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we're talking about my unfinished series. So this is a video that I've seen a couple of people do, but I know I saw Chris from Chris Bookish Cauldron do it, which is what inspired me to make one of these videos, where you just chat through all of the series that you're currently reading, that I've read at least the first book in the series, and I at least somewhat intend to finish the series. So I have split this into two larger categories, and one of them I kind of split into subcategories. So the first category is for series that all of the books are already out, and my subcategories for that one are for series that I totally intend to finish the series. And then the other one is for series that I am still deciding if I'm going to finish that series. Because I actually have quite a few series that I've read the first one or two books in the series, and I am not sure yet if it's hooked me and if I intend to commit to finishing the entire series, but I am technically reading them. And then my other category is for series where they're still ongoing. So not all of the books are published, but in most cases I am totally caught up on what is out. All right, so let's get started. So the first series that is on this list is The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So I'm actually counting this as one series because that's how I tend to think of it. Technically it's split up into smaller, mostly trilogies and one quartet, but I think of it as one large 16-book series, and I think a lot of people do also. So I have read the first three trilogies, so the first 9 books in the series, which are the Farseer trilogy, the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and the Tawny Man trilogy. So I have 2 series left in this larger series, which are the Rainwild Chronicles, which has 4 books, and the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which is 3 books. So I have 7 books in total to finish in the Realm of the Elderlings. Also, I think there are technically 2 books that are like novellas or companions in some way that aren't part of the main series. So if I include those, then maybe that's like 8 or 9 books left in this world. The next series that I have are the Books of Amba by Tasha Suri. So this is a companion duology. I read the first book last year, I think, which is Empire of Sand, and I have one more book to read, which is Realm of Ash. And as I said, it's a companion series, so this one it's not a direct sequel to the first one. I think we're following a different character who is the sister of the main character from the first book. But yeah, I read the first one and I really liked it, and I definitely want to read the second one. I already have it and I'm planning to read it soon, so hopefully I will be able to check this one off of my list of ongoing series. Then I have a middle grade series, which is Howl's Moving Castle. So I read the first one, Howl's Moving Castle, last year maybe, or the year before. I don't remember when I read these books, but I really enjoyed it, and there are 2 more books in the trilogy. I've heard that the first book is really the best and that the other 2 aren't as good, but I do still want to complete the trilogy. Then I also have a middle grade that is the Time series by Megan Morrison. So this is a series of fairy tale retellings, and I've read the first 2. The first one was a Rapunzel retelling, the second was a Cinderella retelling, and I have one left, which is, I think, a Princess and the Frog retelling, and each book kind of tackles like a specific issue, and I just really enjoyed the first 2 and I really want to read the last one. The thing that I've kind of been holding off on it for was that I was kind of hoping that there would be an audiobook for the third one, because I listened to the first 2 as audiobooks and I loved them as audiobooks, and I would love to read the third one that way. But now it's been a while since the third book came out and it doesn't look like there's going to be an audiobook for it, so I have the physical book on my shelf and I'll probably just read it physically at some point. I just don't tend to physically read a lot of middle grade. I tend to enjoy middle grade a lot more as audiobooks, so I kind of haven't been motivated to read that one yet. Then another middle grade, since we're just doing the middle grades right now, is the Trials of Apollo series by Rick Riordan. So this is his series. This is a series that is set in, you know, the same world as the Percy Jackson books. In this one, we're following the god Apollo, who's been like born into the body of a mortal as a punishment. This is probably my least favorite series, by Rick Riordan set in this world, so I just haven't been reading them very quickly. But I think I only have one more book in this series to read, so I really should just read it to finish it, because I really just want to complete all of the books that are set in this world, because I've enjoyed so many of the other series that are in the world of Percy Jackson. It's just this one series that I'm like not as into. Then moving away from middle grade, I have the Salvagers series by Alex White. So this is a sci-fi series, or maybe kind of like sci-fantasy, because there is magic mixed in with the technology. And I just remember it being a really fun series that's following this like band of characters who are all kind of like scavengers, but then they find out that they're, I don't know, is some like larger plot in the universe that they get involved in by accident or something like that. It's been a while since I read the first book, which is, I think, A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe, but I remember really enjoying it. I actually just recently bought the second book, which is A Bad Deal for the Whole Galaxy, so that I can finally continue this series. It's been quite a few years. I think it's been at least 2, if not 3 years since I read the first one, so I have to decide if I have to reread it before reading the second one, but I kind of hope not. But there are 2 books left in this trilogy that I still need to read. Then I have the Devabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty, which I read the first book, City of Brass, last year, and I enjoyed it. I wasn't like blown away by it, but I thought it was really interesting. I thought it had a really interesting desert setting, and I liked that the main character has healing magic, which is something I always enjoy, so I do want to continue on with the series. I already have the second book, although I read the first one as an audiobook, and I might do the same for the second book, so I'm not really sure if I'm going to do physical read or audiobook for that one. Then I have the Books of Pelennor by Alison Croghan, and this is a YA fantasy series that I started a really long time ago, and I think when I started it, only the first 2 books were out at the time, and I think that's why I never finished, because I read the first 2 books, and while I was waiting for the 3rd book to come out, I think I forgot about it, and never finished it. So I still need to read, I think, the last 2 books in the series, but I do remember really enjoying this, and I want to get back to the series, but I might have to reread the first 2 because I don't remember a lot from it. So I have 2 more books left in that series, but I also may have to reread the first 2, so it would be like reading 4. Then I have the United States of Asgard trilogy by Tessa Gratton, which has kind of a similar premise to a lot of Rick Riordan's books, where it's kind of a contemporary fantasy where we're following these like demigods who are the descendants of gods from mythology, although this one is based on Norse mythology, and they go on adventures and like road trips where they have to track down mythical creatures and like, I don't know, do stuff like that. And I read the first one last year, and I think I've actually never talked about this book on my channel because the month that I read it, I think I forgot about it, and I forgot to talk about it in my wrap-up. So I don't think I ever mentioned that I read the first one, which overall, like, I felt pretty neutral about the first one. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it was fine. If it wasn't written by one of my favorite authors, I probably wouldn't continue the trilogy, but I do want to read all of Tessa Gratton's books, so I want to finish the series, and since like I didn't hate it, it's not like a horrible chore to have to finish it. I just don't know if otherwise I would have been motivated enough to continue the trilogy, but I have 2 more in that series. Then I have the Beast Player duology by Nahoka Uhashi. This is another situation where I read the first book and then didn't realize that the series continued and didn't know that there was going to be a second book. So I read the first one maybe 2 years ago, and I really enjoyed the first half of the book, and then I was a little more lukewarm about the second half of the book, but overall I liked it, and I liked it enough that when I just recently found out that there's actually a sequel to it, I want to read the sequel, which is The Beast Warrior. So I actually just recently got that one and I'm going to be reading it soon, hopefully. Then I also have the King of Scars duology by Leigh Bardugo. The first one is King of Scars. The second one, Rule of Wolves, just came out, and I'm also hoping to read that one very soon. And this is a series that is set in her Grishaverse. And then I have one romance series, which is the Ravenswood series by Talia Hibbert. Talia Hibbert is one of my favorite contemporary romance authors. I've only recently started reading contemporary romance, but I really love her books. Her Brown Sisters trilogy is really my favorite, but I also have been enjoying the Ravenswood series. Although it's not one where I binge the books, I really just kind of pick one up when I suddenly get in the mood to read a romance. So I've read the first 2 books in the trilogy, so I only have 1 book left, and then kind of like half a book because I think there's a companion novella or short story or something that's also set in the same like world town as the other Ravenswood books. All right, so now we're on to the books that I am unsure if I'm going to be finishing these series. So first up, we have The Legends of the First Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. So this is an adult high fantasy series that I read the first book, Age of Myth, and I know that he has quite a few series that are set in this world, and a lot of people start with the, I think, Rayuria Revelations or something like that, which maybe I should have started there, but I wanted to start with Age of Myth because the premise for that one really intrigued me, and I did enjoy it, but I also wasn't like super compelled to read the next book. However, since reading the first one, my mom has actually read the series, so I gave her the first book to see, like, oh, maybe you'll like this. Like, I recommend books to her a lot, and she read the first book and loved it, and then just binge read like I think all of Michael J. Sullivan's books, and she loves them. And she and I have slightly different taste in books, but that does make me more motivated. Like, it makes me more interested in finishing the series, so I am curious about continuing on with the series. And if I did decide to complete the Legends of the First Empire series, there are 5 more books that I would need to read. Then I have the Night Runner series by Lynn Flewelling, and this is one I started reading as part of the Scala Along. At this point, I have started reading I read the first 2 books, which were Luck in the Shadows and Stalking Darkness, and I felt pretty neutral about both of them, although the second book had some specific things that I wasn't really a fan of. So I'm still kind of deciding if I want to continue on with the series. I think I'm going to read at least 1 more book in the series before deciding, but if I do decide to finish the series, there are 5 more books in this series to read. Then another series that has 5 more books to read is the Green Rider series by Kristen Britton. So this is another one that I just read the first book, and I enjoyed it. It follows this girl who kind of accidentally becomes one of the king's messengers, and she gets like magical powers, and it has a foresty setting, and she's like a horse animal companion. So there are a lot of elements to it that I enjoyed, but for some reason I just wasn't super compelled to immediately read the next book. So I am interested in continuing, but I'm not sure how invested I am. Then I have the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers, and this is a very popular science fiction series, which I've only read the first book, which is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I felt pretty neutral about it. I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as most people seem to, but I am curious enough to read the second book, which I have, and like I have it on my shelves, so I probably will at least be reading the second book, but I'm not sure about the rest of the series. But at the moment, I think there are 3 more books in the series that I would need to read if I did complete it. Then I have the Rune Lord series by David Farland, and this is a series that I read a very long time ago, and I thought it was complete and didn't realize that it kept going. There were more books to read. So I think I read the first like 6 books or something in the series, and I thought it was over, but then he published like 2 more books, and there's technically another one that is supposed to be coming out, but it's been like 10 years since the last one was published, and it seems like the consensus online is like the final book that hasn't been published yet is just never coming out. So this series, it has 2 or 3 books in it that I have not read yet. But also in order to read those, I would probably have to reread the entire series, which is something that I kind of want to do this year. Well, I want to at least reread the first book in the series to see if I actually want to reread the whole series, because it's been such a long time that I really don't remember anything about this series. Next up, we have the Vorkosigan series by Lois McMaster-Bujold. This is her science fiction series, which I think is the series that she may be most well known for, and yet the books that I've read from her are all her fantasy series. Like, I've read most of Lois McMaster-Bujold's books, but they've all been in her fantasy series. And I actually have one of her fantasy series later on in the list. But yeah, so this is her sci-fi series. I read the first one, which there are like different ways, there are different orders that you can read the books in, but I read Shards of Honor. And I wasn't that into it, but I didn't hate it, and I like this author in general, so I definitely want to try at least one or two more books to see how I feel about it. But it is a very long series, so if I do finish this series, I'm gonna have to read 15 more books. And the last one in this category is the Celtic Blood series by Melanie Karsak, which is a like historical fantasy series that I started last year, I think. And I read the first one. I thought it was okay, but I was intrigued enough that I might read the rest of the series, and if I complete it, there will be 3 more books for me to read. Now we're on to the last category, which are the ongoing series. So these are series that not all of the books have been published yet, but the series are still ongoing, and in most cases I have caught up with everything that is published. So the first one on this list is the Warrior Bards trilogy by Juliet Marillier. I love this series. I've read the first 2. The second book was so good. And it's a, you know, Celtic historical fantasy series, which I love. And there is one more book coming out, which is coming out later this year, and I'm super excited for it. Then we have the Penric and Desdemona series by Lois McMaster-Bujold, which is a series of novellas set in the world of the 5 gods. And I think that there are currently 8 books out. I haven't read the 8th one, but I'm hoping to get to it this month, which is The Masquerade in Lodi. But I have no idea how many books are supposed to be in this series. I don't think that she has said how many are meant to be in the series, so I don't really know what to expect. Then we have the Lost Queen series by Signe Pike. This is historical fiction set in early medieval Scotland. I've read the first 2 books, and there's one more book in the main trilogy that I think will be coming out next year, hopefully. And then she also recently announced that there's going to be a prequel in this series as well, so there are 2 more books that I am waiting for. Then we have the Founders trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett, which I've read the first 2, and there is one more book in this trilogy that I am still waiting for. I loved the first book, and I was a little more in the middle about the second book, but I'm really excited to see how this trilogy wraps up. It has a really interesting magic system. Then there's the Sixth World series by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I really don't know how many books are meant to be in the series. I've read 2. I know that 1 is supposed to come out sometime soon, hopefully either this year or next year, but I don't really know if it's a trilogy or if it's a series that's just going to be ongoing. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy monster hunting series, and if it kind of stays within the you know, urban fantasy genre, those series tend to be really, really long and just kind of keep going and going and going with that like monster of the week kind of setup. So I don't really know if there is a set number of books yet, or if it is just going to kind of keep going like that. Then we have a few series by Seanan McGuire. So I have the Wayward Children series, which is her series of novellas about kids that go to portal worlds. And I think there's only one more book left in the series. I've read all of the ones that are already out, so there's just one more that we're waiting for that I think will come out in January next year. Then there is the Middle Game series, which I think the first book came out in 2019, I believe. And at the time it was intended to just be a standalone, but I read it in 2019 and I loved it. And then it has later been announced it's going to be part of a series, or at least there's going to be a sequel to it, which I think is coming out next year. And I don't really know how I feel about that because I loved the first book and I think it worked so well as a standalone, and I'm a little bit scared to have a second book. But Seanan McGuire, like, she's a really good author, you know, and I trust her, and also she writes a lot of series, so I believe that she also like understands how to write a good sequel and a good series. So I'm a little nervous about it, but I also have faith in her. So I'm definitely going to be reading the next one. And as I said, I don't know if it's going to just be a duology or if this is part of a longer series. So at least one more book, but other than that, I don't know what to expect. And then the last one by Seanan McGuire is the Up and Under series, which is a companion series to the Middle Game series, because there is this like children's book series that's referenced in Middle Game, and she is writing that series under the pen name, I think, A. Deborah Baker, which is also about portal fantasy. It's kind of like that world's version of a Wizard of Oz story, which I'm not totally sure how many of the books in the series I'm going to read. So far there's only one out and I have read that, and I know there is one more that's been announced. I don't know how long the series is intended to be, but I mean, I didn't love the first book, but I think that's just because I don't really like portal fantasy and I don't really like Wizard of Oz, and while this is not exactly Wizard of Oz, it's very much its own thing, it has like a similar vibe to it. So I kind of want to read it because I want the context for it, because it is referenced in Middle Game, which I love, but I also just like don't really enjoy the books themselves that much. Next up is the Dreamer trilogy by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the spin-off series to the Raven Cycle, which in this series we're following the Lynch brothers, and they get into a bunch of other shenanigans that are more like world-ending kind of situations, and it has a lot of stuff about art. Like, I don't know how to explain what happens in this series. I've only read the first book, which is Call Down the Hawk. The second book, which is Mr. Impossible, just came out and I'm going to be reading it very soon. So at the time of filming this video, there are 2 books in this series that I haven't read, which is Mr. Impossible and then whatever the third book is. But by the time this video is up, I may or may not have read the second book. It depends on how my reading goes, but I'm planning to read it very, very soon. Then we have the Numair Chronicles by Tamara Pierce, and this is a high fantasy duology that is set in the world of Tortall, which like a lot of her books are set in. I love all of her Tortall books. I never say that word correctly. And this duology is a prequel duology to a lot of the other ones. It's giving backstory to this character Numair, who we meet in some of the other series. And I read the first one when it came out a couple of years ago, but it's been, I think, maybe like 2 or 3 years since that first book came out. And I think there were some circumstances where the author, I think she was sick at one point, and then there were some other things that happened that were kind of slowing down the process, and that's all very like understandable. But yeah, so I have no idea when this next one is supposed to come out. Supposedly it might be coming out later this year, but I'm not counting on it just because the date has been pushed back and pushed back so many times. So hopefully it will come out soon, and then I will be able to finish the duology, so because I only have 1 book left to finish that series. Then we have Nightshine by Tessa Gratton. So the first book, Nightshine, came out last year, I think, and at the time that it was published, I think it was considered a standalone, and then later it was announced that she is doing a like companion book to it, so it'll be like a companion duology or series. This is another situation that I really don't know how many books there are going to be in this series, if it's just going to be 1 more or if it's going to be a whole series. But yeah, I really love Tessa Gratton's books, and I'm going to be reading the second one, which I think is called Moon Dark Smile, which I believe is coming out next year. And then the last series that I have is one more romance series, which is the Well Met series by Jen DeLuca. I've read the first 2 books. These take place at a Renaissance festival, and it's just a really fun romance series. And there's 1 more book that I think is coming out later this year. So those are all of my unfinished series. I think all in all, it comes to like 32-ish series that I have ongoing at the moment. Some of them definitely weigh more heavily on my mind. Some of them I take more seriously than others. And there are some that I just kind of forget about and I'm like, one day, and that day never comes. But yeah, so this number I think is, I guess, quite a few, but it doesn't really bother me that much, so I don't know how to judge whether this is a lot of series or not. This year I am trying to be more consistent with like finishing series if I can, and just like binging through series instead of letting them lapse and then like not having the motivation to complete them. So I am trying to like complete series and binge series more this year so that I can just like get them completed instead of forgetting about them. But I also am starting a bunch of series this year as well. So, you know, I just keep adding books, I keep adding series to this list, but it really doesn't bother me. These don't weigh very heavily on my mind, so it's fine. But those are all of my unfinished series. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!